G'day guys, Steve with Broken Sprocket, and in this video I'm going to be replacing the wheel bearings on a dirt bike. Firstly, I'm going to show you how to check if your wheel bearings are any good, and then secondly, we're going to replace the wheel bearings. It doesn't really matter what type of dirt bike you own. In this case, it's going to be a YZ85 because the rear wheel bearings need to be replaced, but it doesn't matter if it's that RMZ, that DRZ, a KTM. They're all pretty much the exact same thing. So, let's get started. To check your wheel bearings, you will need to get your bike up on a stand and have the wheel that you want to check up off the ground. You simply grab one hand at the top, one hand at the bottom, and move it from side to side, this way. Now you can see as I move the wheel, the movement. If you look down to this section here where the wheel bearing is on the axle, you will see that the wheel is moving quite a lot. So these wheel bearings need to be replaced. Okay, this is the wheel bearing kit that I have purchased for the YZ85. When we open it up, boing, we have two seals. They go on the ends of the wheel and the two bearings. Now what I want to do is open up these bearings, and you'll see that they've got two plastic caps on here. They're like a dust cap. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to carefully pry this cap off and put more grease in it, because sometimes this one here looks like it hasn't got too bad amount of grease in it, but sometimes you can get them and they can have virtually no grease in them, which means the bearing life will be very limited. So I'm going to add more grease. I'm just going to use this high temperature wheel bearing grease. I'm going to add more grease into this wheel bearing. Really try and squish it in the best that you can. Really put a lot of pressure on it so it goes right in between those bearings. Okay, now I know that this bearing has plenty of grease on it. I will carefully replace this cap. Make sure that it clicks in. Give the bearing a bit of a clean up. Get the excess grease off it. Now I know this bearing is completely packed very well with grease. I'm going to do the same with this bearing, obviously. Now, both of these bearings are going to go into the freezer overnight so that they freeze, and what that will do is they will very slightly contract, which will make it easier to fit into the wheel. So I'll put them in the freezer overnight and I'll see you back here in the morning. Here we go. Here's the second bearing that I pulled open, and you can see hardly any grease in this bearing at all. So that's the reason why I will pop those little dust caps off and pack it with more grease. Next thing to do is to remove the rear wheel from the motorcycle. Now with the rear wheel removed, let's take a close look at the hub. Okay, I've got the wheel sitting on a couple of pieces of wood. That's so I can keep this section of the hub off of the concrete. Now you'll have a wheel spacer, simply comes out. And then you have this dust seal. So that they also come brand new in the pack, so remove the dust seal. To remove the dust seal, just get a screwdriver under and it should just pop out easy. Okay, under there we've got this circlip. So if you don't have any circlip pliers, well, go and buy some. Or you could possibly take it out for a screwdriver or something else. That easily comes out. Okay, between each bearings and in between this hub section, there's like a collar and it goes from one bearing to the other side. You need to get a screwdriver in there and give it a hit so that it moves to one side so that you can get access to the wheel bearings with the screwdriver so you can push the wheel bearing out. Okay, just go underneath the section of wheel bearing. You'll feel that collar should be a lip, and just give it a hit so it goes to one side. Now you can see that that collar is pushed to one side, so that will expose this section of bearing so I can come from the other side and push this bearing out. Now we're on to the other side. I go down and I can feel that bearing, and now I can give it a bit of a tap and hopefully it'll just come out. Well, these bearings have been a little bit stubborn. I'm going to apply a little bit of heat around the hub, and then hopefully it will loosen it up a bit so it will pop out. Okay, with a little bit of heat, I've almost got it all the way out now. Now the piece in the center there, once it starts to move, you can move it around a bit, so you can move your screwdriver or punch or whatever you're using to rotate around here a little bit easier. There we go. And there's that piece here. Now once that pressure's off, that will move around a lot easier, but the very first one you'll have to put a bit of pressure on there. But with the first one out, now you've got a real lot of access to get that second bearing, because it's a lot easier now all that stuff has gone. And that bearing has just collapsed and broken, so that makes it a little bit harder, because now I'm just going to have to get the outer race out, which is going to be difficult. I'm having a lot of trouble getting this bearing out now that it's collapsed. If you remember at the start of the video, this bearing here was the one that wobbled. So as I've put a little bit of pressure on it, it's just simply collapsed because it's buggered. Okay, because that bearing is shattered, I'm going to try and use my blind bearing pulling kit. I'll see if I can get either one of these two to go into that broken bit of bearing and then pull it out with this slide hammer. The easier way is just to push it out with a screwdriver, but because that one is shattered, I'm going to have to try and use this, see if I can get this in. Now what this does is this pin will spread these open and bite the bearing, but because this one is kind of in between sizes, I'm not quite sure if it's going to go in enough to push it out enough to grab that bearing, but I can only try. Okay, this is actually biting behind the bearing now, so if I tighten it up, it should grab. And that has bitten it on good now. I should be able to hook the slide hammer up and hopefully pull this bearing. Here we go, we got it. And it's finally come out. Okay, that was more difficult than I was hoping for. You can see the first bearing, it just popped out quite easily. The second bearing, well, it's all shattered, it's a broken mess. And this is the one that seemed to have the most amount of movement in it, so I'd say it was basically ready to collapse inside the bike. And I just had to get this here puller, bearing puller, to take it out, because it wasn't going to come out because I had lost the section where I could actually get the screwdriver, or if you've got a punch, that's that to bite onto, and I didn't have that ability anymore, so I had to get this blind puller to pull that bearing out. Okay, it's time to insert the new bearings into the hub. These are the ones that I've just pulled out of the freezer that have been frozen overnight. Now the easiest way is to freeze these so they shrink, put a bit of heat around the hub, and hopefully it'll just fall straight in. If not, you'll need a socket to go over the bearing. You have a bearing here, and you need the socket to be big enough to grab the outer race, which is the outer section of the steel piece, but not too big that it gets stuck in the hub. So you just need to go through, find the socket that fits. That one's too small. That one there fits much better. New bearing, frozen. See, it almost pops straight in without even any pressure, but it will need just a slight tap to make sure it goes all the way in, just with this socket. And there it is, it's in. Now before you put the second bearing in, do not forget to put this in there, because once one bearing's in, the second bearing will push up on it. Okay, now with both bearings in each side and that sleeve inside, put the circlip back on this one. Okay, now that the hub has cooled down and there's no more heat left in it, put the new dust caps on. This one was a real difficult one. Normally they're not this difficult to get off. Normally you can take them out with hardly any heat or none at all. This one was a very, very difficult one. So I definitely recommend putting the bearings in the freezer. That definitely makes it easier for them to slide in. But yeah, this one was a tough one. Now these will just pop in. Your fingers should be good enough just to pop them in there. Okay, it's finally done. We'll have a look and make sure there's no movement in this bearings. They're brand new and I can guarantee you there won't be, but we'll just double check from the start of the video to the finish. Now, this wheel was a difficult one. I've had a lot of motorbikes over the years and I've done a lot of wheel bearings. This one was the toughest one I've ever done. So it was good in a way. In the video you can see what happens when it does get tough. I'm lucky I had a source of heat, and I also had this blind bearing puller, because if I couldn't grab onto that broken bearing that had shattered inside this hub, well, I probably would never have got it out. So I was lucky in that case that I had these specific tools. But let's have a look at the wheel and check the movement. Okay, like before, hands on the bottom, hand on the top, and wiggle it about, and look at that. There's nothing. It is absolutely spot on now with these brand new bearings. Alrighty, that's it for this video. That was a tough one. But this here is the reason why the bearings need to be replaced, because they were broken. So if you like this kind of thing, consider subscribing, and I'll see you in the next video.